Now Show. Brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam.
Welcome, I'm Lise Voldeng. This is the Future Now Show, brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam. In December 2015, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP21, will be held in Paris. It is regarded by many, including myself, as the nexus moment for our species and our planet, the nexus moment when we will determine, based on what we decide there and decide to enact there, how our lives and the lives of all creatures on the planet will survive or thrive. It is that moment. As my longtime friend and colleague, the NASA scientist Lynn Harper, said to me in 2008, we need a 200-year commitment to change at every level of culture if we're going to survive as a species on this planet, and it needs to start now. Radical climate change is upon us. The question is not how it happened, it is what we can do to manage ourselves and the quality of our lives within the landscape of it. Warring over terminology and ideology and what caused what and whether it's this or that does not create effective emergency response systems to manage the global effects of natural disasters. It does not feed and water us in areas of drought, nor help us survive extreme heat, nor does it help us survive extreme cold, or the advent of increasingly virulent diseases in areas where climate impact is most extreme, such as New Orleans, or the reappearance of diseases such as Dengue fever along the eastern American seaboard. It is only concerted will and collaborative effort, cutting through the morass of morasses, simply, succinctly, locally, globally, that empowers us. Today, we have invited evolutionary biologist and author, Dr. Elisabet Sahtouris, to share her assessment of how we can successfully navigate such disruptive climate changes environmentally, economically, and politically. To start, Elisabeth, my first question is, what do you see as the single most important issue that we need to resolve, and how do you think we're best served resolving it in order to thrive?
Thank you, Lise, for the introduction, and I certainly agree with you that we need to get practical about global heating. We are moving relentlessly into a hot age, and while humans have survived a dozen or so ice ages since we began, although we did most of that just as hunter-gatherers got through those ice ages. We've never faced a hot age, but Earth has. This is not new to the Earth. We've had both snowball Earths and completely no snow Earths in the past. And the single most important thing is for everybody to get on board and realize, as you said, that we have to make practical efforts to adapt to this change. I don't believe that we can stop it, nor do a lot of other people I know in the sciences who have looked deeply at the issues. Our planet is just bigger and older than we are, and it knows what it's doing to adjust to problems, and we don't. And so far, every technological solution we've tried has not worked very well at all. It's caused more problems than it solved. So adaptation is the number one issue on my agenda.
How do you see, what do you, I agree, first I want to say, how do you see that being implemented practically? I mean, we're kind of a stuck species collectively, as someone I know says. It's like we're entrained in this consensual reality that's completely delusional, and it's really addressing that effectively that helps us to adapt. So, how would you suggest?
It is. Obviously, we are living in a delusion that this isn't happening for most people. It's probably still a very small minority of people who really get what it means for sea levels to come up 65 meters. It's if you're standing at an office building at sea level, that's up to the 15th floor. Now, consider that 13 of the 20 largest cities in the world are at sea level. They will be wiped out. Now, scientists and all of us would love to have nice, predictable curves where we can tell you exactly how the ocean is going to rise centimeter by centimeter over what time trajectory, and that simply cannot happen. There's a wonderful BBC video about a Canary Island volcano that's due to erupt at any time. And they've done all the calculations of what will happen when it blows. It will blow out the side of a mountain, and it's aimed directly at New York. And the tsunami that it will create will wash up Manhattan, as there's nothing in the Atlantic Ocean that can possibly stop that tsunami. Nothing. And it will grow as it goes. So it will be the largest tsunami in recorded history, and we can't stop it. And at the end of the documentary, they say, we cannot tell you when this will happen, but we can assure you it will happen. You know, it's going to blow sooner or later. That's how nature is. And when she blows, she blows. And if you ask really top-level climatologists, such as Jim Hansen in the United States, what will wake humanity up? He'll say, when the sea level rises a few meters at once. You see, it's not going to be centimeter by centimeter, because once the ice has gotten spongy enough from the evaporation, and in many areas, a third of the ice sheet is already evaporated, and the atmosphere is holding about 50% more than normal moisture. And nobody knows how much it can hold. What we do know is, for instance, that Boston had the biggest snowstorm in recorded history this winter, and that hurricanes are traveling up to the New England area instead of hitting in Florida. And that in other words, the weather systems are completely disrupted already by this heavy, heavy load of moisture in the atmosphere that doesn't show on maps, except on weather maps, where you can see that the wind belts that used to circulate closer to the poles are now moving toward the equator, and that's why you're getting this huge. Look at Texas is flooding. Texas, at the same time as Texas has immense droughts, it has enormous flooding now. So what's going on? How can within one state in the United States you have, a simultaneous disaster of floods and droughts? That's how nature is. It's not nice smooth curves the way we would like it. So we will wake up when that first big wave hits, and when all those cities are hit at once. But if you were a business person, and you knew this was coming, and you just couldn't tell exactly when it was coming, but you may hit your crisis tomorrow or in 10 years, what do you do to prepare? Don't you act now? It's amazing how long it's taking people to start acting proactively. Now, all the things that you asked, what exactly is it we should do? All the things we should do to adapt to a hot age, or most of them, we should be doing anyway. In other words, if we have severe pollution due to burning fossil fuels, we shouldn't only stop burning the fossil fuels for fear of what it's doing to global warming, but because of what it's doing to our own health. Why that we're breathing such things. And we see now that alternative energy is viable. Do you know what the biggest problem in the alternative energy field is today? It's what to do with the excess energy they're producing, because there isn't enough storage capacity or shipping ability to send that electricity around. So these are very solvable problems. We can do that. We can move out of fossil fuels into clean green energy. It's already happening. Trillions of dollars have already been invested in clean green energy, but it needs to get beyond that. We need to get rid of all of the fossil fuel pollution. China is usually the test case these days for showing how bad pollution can get. We've cleaned some of it up in the West, but not nearly enough, and we have to worry about the whole globe. So clean green energy is certainly one. And the other really important thing is much more local production of what else is needed. Food and energy are the biggies. And I include water in food. Years ago, when oil companies in Canada were asking me, what's our future? I said, water. You have pipeline technology, you've got to get that water around. So I think that's what will happen to the fossil fuel industry. It will go into the moving water around, desalinating and moving water around the planet, and local food production. Now, 2 years ago, or maybe even more now, the UN issued a report saying the only way to feed the burgeoning populations of Earth, even doubling the population again, would be through small farms using natural methods. Now, that was huge news, and yet it was kept out of the media because the lobbies, and the ownership of media is on the side of let's not disrupt business. And big agriculture is a huge business on the planet. So don't tell people they're going to have to be producing local food is where is another instance of our insanity as a species at this time.
Well,
And
not only that, there's I know in the United States, for example, I have a friend in the Washington area who cultivates a nice little garden for herself and her family, and she received a letter from the Homeland Security Department saying she was not allowed to be growing food like that. So I don't remember the details of how that's being moved, but I know that there are many people who have their own farms or small farms that in both. I'm only aware of this in Oregon and Washington, where they're getting cease and desist. So some kind of pattern of tracking is occurring and trying to
well,
manage crops, which is obviously another level of insanity.
yeah, well, we're living through very bizarre times now. Not only have we got all this global weather weirding going on because of warming, people, of course, see all these floods and snowstorms and say, ha, so much for global warming, it isn't happening. But it's precisely what we're doing is relocating the polar ice to other latitudes. And once you get it down there, you can't put it back on the poles where it belongs. And so
Yeah, and of course it's natural that a system reaches its apex, so you have an increase of warming, and then suddenly the system reaches its apex of being able to manage and completely readjusts, and everything, as you said, starts to disrupt and go out of just
yes,
completely
that's
reconfigure itself. And as you also said, the Earth has obviously had significantly more experience than us in doing that.
Yes, I like to tell people, you don't have to read a lot of statistics. You need to know two things. One is what is a positive feedback loop? So that if you ask people, do you believe that the more the ice melts, the warmer the planet will get? And most people will say, well, yeah. And then you say, well, do you believe that the warmer the planet gets, the more the ice will melt? Well, yeah. Now put those two statements together. The hotter it gets, the more the ice melts, and the more the ice melts, the hotter it gets. That is a positive feedback loop. It's feeding on itself and it's expanding something, in this case, the temperature of Earth. The other thing that should be taught widely to every child in every school and every grown up as well is how exponential curves work. And some of the usual ways of showing it is if you have a pond and there are pond lilies growing on it, and every day for every single pond lily leaf, there are two, then how much of the pond is covered 2 days before the entire pond is covered? It takes a long time to start this process going to really see the difference in a fairly large lake. But 2 days before it's completely covered, it's only 1/4 covered, right? Because 1/4 will go to half by doubling, and half doubles to the whole thing. So that's called the hockey stick curve. And we hear that more and more in the news nowadays, where things go very slowly for a long time and then suddenly they jump up. In my lifetime, the population of Earth has tripled, 3 times what it was when I was born. That is a hockey stick curve. The population of Earth took a long time getting to where it was when I was born, and then suddenly triples. So that imagine if we tripled again in another lifetime. What are we now, around 7 billion, and we were at 21 billion
It's
in another 70, 80 years?
incomprehensible.
That curve isn't going to change direction. That's where it's headed, except that it isn't going to happen. So maybe overpopulation is another thing the planet is trying to adjust to. You know, we're a rapacious species. We've globalized, and that was important. And I'd like to get talking about my version of evolution biology as a maturation cycle where we go through intense hostile competition in order to get to a cooperative phase.
That's
And
a very, very important point. And if I could, I'd like to offer some context before you go into that, because as we're speaking about sea level rising and resource changes, all that stuff. I'm a member of the Silicon Valley Space Club, which is affiliated with NASA, and I've done some stuff with NASA. And one of the things we're always talking about is in our calls, our meetings, is how do we deal with coastal displacement of 150 million people when sea levels rise? How do we deal with resource wars once we're dealing with all of that? How are we preparing populations? How are we managing disease? How are we managing violence in areas where there's increase in the rise in violence in areas where things are getting colder, things are getting hotter, or obviously there are food and water shortages. So it is about how are we dealing with these things effectively? And I'd love to hear your response to that, especially in the context of the reality of the Earth being in a maturation cycle.
Yeah, you know, it seems like an overwhelming big issue, but as I said, if we try to narrow it down to things like food and water and energy, which are the basics for human life, we are going to have to produce those things as locally as we can because power grids are going to be interrupted, shipping is going to be interrupted, air travel is going to be interrupted, which means that when the sea levels do start to rise in those 13 of the 20 biggest cities, which include, you know, cities like Tokyo and New York and London, and you name it. Most of the big cities are on coasts, and the sewage will back up, which is where the disease hazard comes in, and then the water supply will salinate from the seawater coming up through these cities and their underground water systems and stuff. And then, of course, the airports and the piers will be washed away at once because sea level cities have level airports. So what are we going to do with that? There is a solution. You could base all your air travel on actually on hydrogen dirigibles that move at jet speeds, but they're not in production yet. And you can't even get people to invest in them, even though the technology is proven. The one I'm talking about is the Pentagon would love to do it, but their budget's been cut, so they can't develop new technology, believe it or not. So we have solutions. We're a very creative species. We can adapt. I went to Morocco some years ago to see how people lived in deserts comfortably thousands of years ago. And it's very low-tech stuff. So that's what's amazing is that they did work out how to live well in deserts, but none of it is profitable technology because it's so low-tech and because anybody can learn how to do it. So, and when you get the really insane situations like Homeland Security telling your friend that she can't grow her own food, or I believe it's also illegal in a lot of places for people to collect rainwater from their roofs to water their gardens with. And we have right now the U.S. military is planning huge war games off the coast of Alaska in the middle of the salmon run area and in the middle of the salmon run season. It's going to wipe out the fishing industry up there and kill every kind of marine life. And they do an environmental impact statement that says all that these things are going to happen, and then somebody stamps it okay in Washington. How can we be this insane? It's just beyond me what's going on here, but that's the situation we're in.
Traditionally, unfortunately, it takes severe crisis, as you said, a sudden tsunami that is hitting in multiple places, massive storms all in one season, and countries unable. I mean, we were unable to respond to something like New Orleans and what happened there very effectively. What if we're getting 5 or 6 of those superstorms a season? Other than crisis, the thing I'm giving consideration to is what is that trigger that triggers us to shift in a constructive fashion? What is it that triggers us instead of in a fear state, a crisis state? What is that impetus to change that unites us in a will to address these things? That's the question I ask myself.
Yes.
And attempt to answer in all of these things.
Well,
From my perspective, the one. No, go ahead.
We have the evidence that whenever there's a crisis, there's 95% to 100% cooperation. People immediately roll up their sleeves and do everything that needs to be done. In Fukushima in Japan, it was 100% cooperation down to the last rice grain shared. So it's very clearly in human nature to cooperate. And I've demonstrated that with an evolution theory that shows, I call it a theory because you have to do that to become credible, but it's a matter of looking at the evidence of what has happened over 4 billion years of evolution. And there's a consistent pattern that evolution has evolved from the simple to the complex through a repeating cycle where a youthful phase is highly competitive. Species grab all the territory and resources they can and multiply as fast as possible and elbow everyone else out of the way in the youthful phase. And that becomes eventually too energy expensive. Listen to that, because that's what's happening to humanity now. Our energy is getting too expensive. And they start to cooperate and to form alliances and to feed each other and to house each other and do things that use less energy and work better for all concerned. Now, the first half of our roughly 4 billion year evolution on Earth was only about bacteria. And they went through exactly that phase, at the end of which they built cooperatives that we call nucleated cells. Those were cooperatives of different kinds of ancient bacteria taking up a division of labor and working together as a colony. Now, because that cell, which was thousands of times bigger than a single bacterium, was new on the planet, it had to go through its own maturation cycle, and it took another billion years before it got through its feisty competitive youth and formed multi-celled creatures. So those are bigger again, and that's what we are. And we know the rest of the story of evolution is told in schools, the worms and things that develop in the sea and coming onto land, and the flowering plants and the dinosaurs and all of those things we've heard about before. And humans are just a blip on the screen, of course. We're one of the very newest additions, as are the grasses, about the same evolutionary age as humans. And we humans and grasses formed a cooperative alliance that's getting a little out of hand because it's only 2 species. But wheat, for instance, is dependent on humans now for propagation, and humans are dependent on wheat for feeding. Unfortunately, we're doing it the wrong way with a monoculture. In nature, lots of species get together in these transitions. So we could talk more about that later if you want. But the essence of the story here is that there's a youthful, feisty, competitive phase, and then the energy expense forces it into cooperation to become stable. Humans actually have gone through this process at the tribal level. We've had about 100,000 years during which we developed the earliest civilizations 6 to 10,000 years ago, we formed the first cities. And these cities are only now being excavated up in the Orkney Islands in the northern UK and in Africa, in the Amazon, in South America, so in Africa, in the Middle East, in Europe, everywhere they're turning up these cities that were formed at that time. And they were undoubtedly cooperative trade centers. They're not walled cities. There are no armaments found in them. They are not yet empires, the earliest cities. Now, notice that cities are a very natural kind of entity on the planet, and when you look at cities from an airplane, cities that have formed naturally over time, they look exactly like nucleated cells on a substrate. So they are far more natural than nation states. And I think one of the things that's holding up our progress now in adapting to climate change is that we're trying to work through these unnatural nation states rather than the cities directly starting to work with each other, which I think is one of the major solutions that should be considered. And mayors of cities have a lot more power than parliamentarians do in national governments. Because, you see, when we built those first cities, they were young and they had to go through their competitive youth and they went into empire building. So we first had empires built by emperors, and then we had national empires, and then we have corporate empires. Now, the corporate empire is running the nation state governments pretty much today. It dictates to them. It can outspend anyone on lobbies and so forth. So the way to go into the future, I think, is through cities, mayor to mayor, city council to city council, going into local alternative energies and local food production and figuring out where it can be done. What we do with the crippling aspects of nation states, which are these war games in fragile ecosystems and the outlawing of collecting water and growing your own food, those things, the people in nation states really have to rise up and insist that that is just totally out of line for a government that's supposed to be for the people, by the people, and of the people. And if the people want to grow food, my goodness, how can you possibly interfere with that? Anyway, that's my maturation cycle in evolution, and I believe that we are again at that place where our competition is getting too expensive, and we need to cooperate as a global family. But we need also to work on the local economies because you can't have a healthy global economy if it's made up of sick local economies. We can talk about the body as one of the most highly, or perhaps the most highly evolved living being on the planet is our own bodies. Our bodies are made of 100 trillion cells and about 10 times that many bacteria that live in our guts and on our skins. So about a quadrillion bacteria and a trillion nucleated cells, all living as a harmonious, collective, cooperative community where no organ tells the others what to do. Is a great diversity of organs and of cell types, and everything is contributing and everything is negotiating the self-interest at each level with that of the other levels in the system. That's, I call that holarchy after Arthur Koestler, who pointed out that in nature all entities are embedded within other entities. He wrote that in a book called Janus, which is the two-faced God looking both ways. And he meant, for instance, that an organ in your body, it looks down at its component cells and up into its organ system and its body. And then the body, of course, becomes part of family, community, ecosystem, nation, world, and planets are part of solar systems and galaxies and so forth. So holarchy all the way up and down. It's not hierarchy.
I think that's a fantastic analogy. I use that myself in trying to describe some of the things that I do. It's like if our bodies, we were walking around and having to govern every our breath and ensure that our heart isn't arguing with our lungs and all the cells are doing what they're supposed to be doing, we would be dead. we would be a non-functional species. But as a whole body, that's what's happening. We're not functioning at a whole level. We're not
Yep.
functioning as entities within entities, working with entities within entities, within a whole system of whatever everything is, that large container of everything. And that, I think, is our the point of us leaving our adolescence, I think.
Yes, and it's wonderful to get this recognition for gut bacteria now. I sometimes think my happy story of evolution should be called "Bacteria Are Us." Lewis Thomas, who was a wonderful essayist, scientist who was head of Sloan Kettering Cancer Research and was at Yale Medical School and wrote these wonderful essay books. One, the first of which was called "Lives of a Cell," in which he said maybe the ancient bacteria invented us as big taxis to get around in safely. Economics has been politicized such that capitalists took on the Darwinian theory in a very superficial way as a dog eat dog world of competition, while the Soviet Union was teaching evolution biology through Kropotkin's work, mutual aid, as cooperation, essentially. And so it was politicized on both sides because capitalism was about competition among individuals and corporations as individuals competing with each other, while the Soviet Union wanted to sacrifice individualism to community so that the state could run everything. So one sacrifices community, the other sacrifices the individual. If you put it together, you have a holarchy in which the individual thrives within a thriving community. And that's what we want. Now, that economic community, the ancient Greeks called the ecos, the household. And so they talked about the logos of the ecos, which we call ecology, as the organization of the household, and then the economy, the ecos and nomos, as the rule of that same household. Now, we pulled apart economy and ecology and then made ecology subservient to our economy by seeing nature just as a set of resources for human consumption. And we should have done just the opposite of fitting our economy into nature's economy, the ecology. And if we had done that, or if we decide to do that now, we will have a wise household or a wise society, an ecosophy. I have written an article called Ecosophy that was published in Cosmos magazine, spelled with a K, Kosmos. You can Google that and find Ecosophy by Elisabet Sahtouris, and that will explain this whole development that we need of a wise society in which we adapt to nature, work within nature, and learn from nature's principles of diversity and harmony and reciprocity and all those wonderful things that we need to do with our economy now. Now, the capitalist phase, the competitive capitalism, was like the youthful phase in the maturation cycle. It was competitive and feisty and acquisitive and inventive and creative. And I like to say to the people at the tops of the corporate world who did that, thank you for being the heroes of that hero's journey that globalized our economy, because it was a natural step and a necessary step in our evolution. And I invite you now to become the heroes of the next phase, where we see that it's too expensive to continue this competition and too destructive, and begin to cooperate and build a mature collaborative society at the global level as well as all local levels. No global economy will ever be healthy if the local economies aren't healthy. It wouldn't work any more than your body could be healthy if your cells were all going unhealthy, or your organs at the next level in between the cells and the body. So we have to look at globalization, and in the light of global warming, we have to realize that we've got to develop local economies into maximum optimal health, because the big systems may be breaking down, whether it's the financial system or the transportation systems, the delivery systems, the production systems. We have to get as self-sufficient as we can at local levels to survive this perfect storm of crises we've now brought on ourselves.
For anyone who would like to learn more about Elisabet's latest work, her new book, Gaia's Dance, is available as a Kindle ebook on Amazon, exploring the story of earthly maturation, planetary manipulation and adaptation, and us as the taxis of gut bacteria. Elisabet, thank you. It was a pleasure hammering through so many challenging issues and looking at that together with you. And for everyone who is watching, thank you for joining us. Let's build a better world.